on the eve of Christmas in December 2007. While people were celebrating, a family gathering in Carnation, Washington turned into one of the most brutal mass murders in the state's history. Michelle Christine Anderson, along with her boyfriend Joseph McEnroe, she arrived at her parents' rural home under the guise of spending the holiday together. But growing anger and long-standing resentments boiled over into violence. Michelle had a history of conflict with her family, arguments over money, property disputes, and a deep belief that she had been wronged for years. This resentment festered, and that night it exploded. Armed and ready, she and McEnroe entered the home and first turned their weapons on Michelle's parents, Wayne and Judy Anderson. And when Michelle's brother Scott arrived with his wife Erica and their 2 young children, happily to celebrate with his parents and sister, all 4 were massacred right inside the home. 6 family members, spanning 3 generations, were executed in cold blood on what should have been a night of celebration. The crime scene was discovered after 2 days when another family member arrived for a holiday visit. Police arrested Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe that same day. Both confessed, admitting to the planned massacre, and their statements revealed not only their lack of remorse, but also how long the resentment had been building. Michelle, in particular, admitted to holding deep grudges, claiming her family had mistreated her, and that she felt entitled to settle the score in blood. She was held and convicted of 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder on the 4th of March 2016, and on the 21st of April 2016, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole at the Washington Correction Center for Women. Susan Lee Vaughn Smith. On the 25th of October 1994, in South Carolina, Susan Smith, a young mother of 2, reported that a carjacker had stolen her Mazda while her children were inside. It was so intense that for 9 days she stood before cameras, appearing on national television, pleading for the safe return of her sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander. But behind those televised tears was a darker truth that started to reveal. Investigators grew suspicious when Susan's story began to look irregular. Eventually, she confessed that there had been no carjacker. Instead, she had pushed her car into John D. Long Lake with her 2 boys strapped inside, leaving them to drown. Just before the crime, she was in a romantic relationship with a man named Tom Finley, who ended their relationship and made it clear he did not want children. Investigators argued that this rejection played a role in her decision to kill her sons. On the 3rd of November 1994, after her confession, Susan Smith was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. She was spared the death penalty, but sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, to be served at Camille Griffin Graham Correctional Institution in South Carolina. But after about 5 years, 2 correctional officers at the institution were charged for having sex with her, and as a result of that, she was moved to Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood, South Carolina. Susan Smith became eligible for parole in November 2024, but it was denied and she remains incarcerated. Yoselin Ortega. In the late afternoon on Thursday, 25th of October 2012, an Upper West Side apartment in Manhattan, New York, turned into the scene of an unthinkable crime. You would not imagine it considering the bond and years of trust involved. Marina Krim, a mother of 3, returned home with her youngest daughter, only to discover her 2 other children, 6-year-old Lucia Krim and 2-year-old Leo Krim, brutally stabbed to death in the bathtub. Standing nearby was the family's trusted nanny, Yoselin Ortega, holding the knife that had ended their lives. In an act of escape, Ortega then turned the blade on herself, stabbing her own throat and wrists, but somehow she survived it. Yoselin Ortega is a Dominican woman who moved to the United States seeking a better life. She had no prior criminal record, no charges of violence in her past, and worked for years as a nanny, appearing dependable and trustworthy. But in the months before the murders, friends and relatives described her as increasingly unstable, overwhelmed by financial pressures and emotional turmoil. The Krims had even helped her family financially, unaware of the darkness building beneath the surface. She was arrested at the hospital after recovering from her self-inflicted wounds and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. Ortega's defense argued that she suffered from severe mental illness, but the jury rejected the insanity plea. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on the 14th of May 2018, serving her time at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in New York. Erin Caffey. Just outside the quiet town of Emory in Texas, where less than 2,000 people lived, a family's life was torn apart on Saturday, 1st of March 2008. 16-year-old Erin Caffey, once seen as a shy, church-going girl, hid a secret rage that exploded into a devastating crime. She looked ordinary, just a regular girl, but inside her was a growing rebellion. Her parents had become increasingly strict after discovering her relationship with her boyfriend Charlie Wilkinson, forbidding the pair from seeing each other. To Erin, it felt like a prison. Friends would later recall her obsession with Charlie and how she confided that her parents were standing in the way of her happiness. That fixation, mixed with teenage defiance, hardened into something far darker. That night, with the help of her boyfriend Charlie Wilkinson and his friend Charles Wade, she orchestrated the brutal murders of her own family. Her mother, Penny Caffey, and her two young brothers, Matthew, aged 13, and Tyler, who was only 8 years old, were slaughtered inside their home. Penny was shot multiple times, while the boys were stabbed and left to die as the house was set on fire. Erin's father, Terry Caffey, was shot 5 times but miraculously crawled nearly 300 yards through the woods to a neighbor's house, surviving against all odds. His testimony would expose the evil plot driven by his own daughter. She was arrested within hours of the crime, hiding with Charlie after the bloodbath. The trial was swift in its judgment. On the 2nd of January 2009, Erin Caffey was convicted of capital murder. Although the jury spared her from the death penalty because of her age, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole only after 40 years. She remains incarcerated at the Christina Melton Crane Unit in Gatesville, Texas. Celeste Beard Johnson. Her life looked very admirable and enviable from the outside, but inside was a far darker reality. Born in 1963, Celeste endured a troubled childhood and a history marked by emotional instability. By the time she met Stephen Beard, a wealthy television executive, she had already been through multiple failed marriages. Stephen was a widower in his 70s, a man with money and comfort but also with vulnerability. In 1993, she met him at an Austin country club, and within 2 years she married him, stepping into a world of luxury she had never known. But what seemed like security quickly unraveled. Celeste struggled with depression and substance abuse, and her life was shadowed by accusations of manipulation and greed. She began an affair with Tracy Tarleton, a woman she met in a mental health facility, and together they hatched a plan that would shatter lives forever. On the morning of the 2nd of October 1999, Stephen Beard was found in his bed with a shotgun blast to his stomach. The shot didn't kill him instantly. He lingered for months, undergoing surgeries and enduring immense suffering, before dying of complications on the 22nd of January 2000. The initial investigation pointed to Tracy, who was arrested after police uncovered her connection to the crime. But when investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Celeste's role. Tracy confessed that she had pulled the trigger but insisted she had done so under Celeste's influence, manipulated by promises, control, and Celeste's repeated claims that Stephen was abusive and needed to be taken care of. Celeste was arrested in March 2002, and her trial drew attention nationwide. Prosecutors painted her as a woman who married for money, grew impatient for her husband's death, and exploited her lover to carry out the crime. On the 20th of March 2003, Celeste Beard Johnson was convicted of capital murder and injury to an elderly person, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 40 years. She serves her time at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Murray Unit in Gatesville. Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Police in Greene County, Missouri made a shocking discovery on the 14th of June 2015 inside a small pink house in Springfield. They found the body of Claudine D.D. Blanchard, lying face down in her bedroom with multiple stab wounds. The house, once filled with the illusion of sickness and sympathy, was suddenly the scene of a violent crime. Her daughter, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who the world had long believed to be gravely ill, was missing. For years, Dee Dee convinced doctors, neighbors, and even charities that Gypsy suffered from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, seizures, and countless other conditions. She shaved Gypsy's head, forced her into a wheelchair, and controlled every part of her life. Behind closed doors, Gypsy was not sick. She was a victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, manipulated into living a life of fabricated illness. The crime was born out of desperation. Gypsy, by then an adult, had begun secretly communicating online with Nicholas Godejean, a man from Wisconsin. Their relationship grew darker as they plotted a way out from Dee Dee's control. In early June 2015, Nicholas Godejean traveled to Springfield, and late on the 9th of June, he entered the Blanchard home. As Gypsy hid in the bathroom, he fatally stabbed Dee Dee to death with a large knife. After murdering her, they mailed the weapon to Wisconsin and took a bus north. On the 14th of June, a disturbing Facebook post on Dee Dee's page led police to trace the IP address to Wisconsin, where they found Dee Dee's body in Springfield and arrested Gypsy and her boyfriend afterwards. The arrest was the moment Gypsy's truth was finally uncovered. Investigators and the public came to see her not as the terminally ill child Dee Dee portrayed, but as a young woman who had endured years of medical abuse and psychological manipulation. The sympathy once reserved for Dee Dee shifted toward Gypsy, whose crime was inseparable from her mother's lies. Still, the law required accountability. In July 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was sentenced to 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to second-degree murder. She was incarcerated at the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Missouri, serving her time while the world debated whether she was a killer or a survivor finally freed from her cage. She was paroled and released from prison on the 28th of December 2023, after serving approximately 8 years of her 10-year sentence for second-degree murder. She has since completed her parole term and is now a free woman. I'd like to know what you think about this particular case. Do you think sending her to jail was the right thing to do? Please let me know in the comments. Also, I post interesting videos every day on this channel. It will help a lot if you show support by subscribing. Thank you very much as you do so. Elizabeth Ann Bishaglia, popularly known as Betty Broderick. In the quiet early hours on the 5th day of November 1989, San Diego police were called to a home in the Hillcrest neighborhood. Inside, they found the bodies of Dan Broderick and his new wife, Linda Colkina Broderick, both shot as they slept in their bedroom. The shooter was no stranger to them, a woman whose rage had been building for years. Betty Broderick, Dan's ex-wife, she had endured a bitter divorce after her husband left her for his much younger legal assistant. Before that night, friends and neighbors reported a series of harassment, threats, and a string of break-ins. Her behavior escalated after Dan won custody of their children, and Betty faced restraining orders and contempt charges for ignoring court orders. She vandalized Dan's property, left obscene messages on his answering machine, and even rammed her car into his front door. Every act drew her closer to a breaking point, until the morning she used a revolver to end the lives of both Dan and Linda. After the murders, Betty calmly called one of her daughters to confess what she had done. When police arrived later that day, she surrendered without resistance. She was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder just after 2 trials, and in February 1991, she was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of 15 years to life, plus 2 additional years for illegal use of a firearm. She was sent to the California Institution for Women in Chino, and later transferred to the California Institution for Women in Corona, where she remains incarcerated. After 2 parole pleas have been denied, she will not be eligible again until January 2032, when she will be 84 years old. Erica Elaine Sifrit. Erica Sifrit's story began in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where she was born in 1977. Raised in a comfortable middle-class home, she grew up with few signs of trouble. By her early 20s, she had married Benjamin Sifrit, a former Navy SEAL. Together they were a volatile couple, bonded by reckless behavior, heavy partying, and a fascination with violence. While Erica herself had no significant criminal history before the events that would later shock the nation, her husband's background and their destructive lifestyle set the stage for what was to come. On that night of the 25th of May 2002, The Sifrites were vacationing in Ocean City, Maryland. They met Joshua Ford and Martha Jeannie Crutchley, a couple from Virginia, while out drinking. The two pairs returned to the Sifrites' condominium, and at some point during the night the situation turned deadly. Prosecutors later revealed that the Sifrites accused Ford and Crutchley of stealing Erica's purse, then trapped them inside the condo, and in a violent confrontation both victims were killed. Their bodies were dismembered and placed in dumpsters across the city. Days later, police recovered bags of human remains, leading to one of Maryland's most disturbing murder cases. The Sifrites might have escaped suspicion, but just days after the murders, they were arrested for a separate crime. On the 31st of May 2002, while burglarizing a Hooters restaurant in Ocean City, they were caught by police. Inside their vehicle, authorities discovered the victims' driver's licenses, bloody clothing, and a handgun. That discovery revealed the truth, tying them directly to the murders of Ford and Crutchley. In March 2003, Erica was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Joshua Ford and second-degree murder in the death of Martha Crutchley. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years and is serving her sentence at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. Benjamin was sentenced to 30 years in prison, and he later divorced Erica in 2010. Nicole Nachtman. In August 2015, Hillsborough County deputies responded to a 911 call from a quiet neighborhood in Lutz, Florida. Inside the home, they found 51-year-old Miriam DeJesus and her husband, 55-year-old Robert Nachtman, shot to death. The surprise came when their 21-year-old daughter, Nicole Nachtman, a college student at Florida State University, became the focus of the investigation. Detectives uncovered that Nicole had driven from Tallahassee to Tampa, confronted her mother and stepfather, and shot them both with a handgun. Miriam was killed in the garage, and Robert in the bedroom. Neighbors reported hearing gunfire and seeing lights on in the house long after. They say Nicole killed her to avoid admitting she hadn't secured housing back at school, and instead of telling her mother the truth, prosecutors said she devised a plot to kill them. She had a troubled relationship with her mother, who had served in the military and was described as strict and controlling. She was arrested days later and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Nicole Nachtman was found guilty on both counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and remains incarcerated at the Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala. Jodi Ann Arias. On the 4th of June 2008, in Mesa, Arizona, police were called to the home of Travis Alexander after friends grew worried when he missed important appointments. What they found inside was not ordinary. Alexander, just 30 years old, was found in his shower, his body covered in nearly 30 stab wounds. His throat had been slit ear to ear, and a gunshot wound shattered his forehead. It was the kind of crime scene that spoke of rage and obsession. As investigation went on, suspicions pointed to his ex-girlfriend, Jodi Arias. Surprisingly for such a ruthless murder, Arias had no previous violent convictions or crime reports. But her life was marked by instability. Friends described her relationship with Alexander as intense and controlling, filled with jealousy, breakups, and reconciliations. A bloody palm print at the crime scene matched her, and a recovered camera from the washing machine revealed time-stamped photographs of both Alexander alive and moments later bleeding on the bathroom floor. On the 15th of July 2008, Arias was arrested at her grandparents' home in Yreka, California, and charged with first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole on the 13th of April 2015 and sent to the Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville, in Goodyear. Kimberly Kessler. In May 2018, Nassau County, Florida, became the backdrop to a strange disappearance that quickly unraveled into one of the state's most disturbing murder cases. Jolene Cummings, a 34-year-old mother of 3, was reported missing after she failed to pick up her children on Mother's Day. The last place she was seen alive was Tangle's Hair Salon in Yulee, where she worked alongside another stylist, Kimberly Kessler. Surveillance footage later showed Jolene leaving work with Kessler on the night of the 12th of May, but Jolene never came home. Days later, her SUV was found abandoned in a Home Depot parking lot, and suspicion turned sharply toward Kessler, the last person known to be with her. Kessler, who was born as Jennifer Marie Seibert in Pennsylvania, had lived a life under assumed names, cycling through over a dozen aliases across multiple states. She had a long record of theft, fraud, and deception dating back years, including a 2009 arrest in Butler for stealing equipment from a gym. By the time she turned up in Florida, she had carefully hidden her past, reinventing herself under the name Kimberly Kessler. But her double life couldn't conceal the evidence mounting against her. Blood belonging to Jolene Cummings was discovered inside the salon, and Kessler herself was caught on surveillance disposing of garbage bags at various locations, which prosecutors believed contained key evidence. Despite an exhaustive search, Jolene's body was never found. The case against Kessler gained further weight after her arrest on the 16th of May 2018, when she was found hiding behind a truck at a rest stop in St. Johns County, Florida. In custody, her erratic behavior only deepened the sense of unease. She lashed out in court, accused staff of poisoning her food, and repeatedly attempted to disrupt proceedings. Yet prosecutors maintained a clear narrative. Kessler had murdered her co-worker and taken extraordinary steps to conceal the crime. On the 27th of January 2022, she was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, confined to Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala. If you enjoyed this and want to see more interesting videos, I'm going to be posting real crime events and prison updates every day on this channel. I would really appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Thank you very much.